I'm Megan. This program is entitled The Thames River Treasures of the Ice Age by Professor Stan Gaby. Welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy the ride.
This is just to add some action to our tour of Mammacoke Island. One of the tributaries feeding into the Thames River up in Norwich, Connecticut is this one. It's the Yantic River, or sometimes called the Gorge on the Yantic, sometimes called Uncas Leap. Its flow is pretty considerable right now because we are at the end of spring. In the summertime it fades, but in the wintertime, this particular winter, 3/4 of it iced over. And a little closer look at the falls. It is considerable. A bunch of spray. Very nice location to visit. I think one of the best waterfalls in all of Connecticut. There is that precipice that Chief Uncas was supposed to have jumped off of and safely landed in the water. A little difficult to do. Since I have the sun to my back, you should be able to see that rainbow right in the middle of the picture. I know that if I tried to zoom in on it, that I'm not going to get much of anything. So let's look at that rainbow against a black background of that wetted rock right down below over the falls. Here's the other water source on the Quinnebog River, or the Setauket, and this also feeds right into Norwich and has a confluence with the Yantic River, and that goes downstream part of the Thames River. Notice that there is a structural building over there which creates power from this, or they used to. But again, we have a pretty impressive waterfall here. Same time as the one that we just saw at the Yantic River. And I'd like to take a look at this sign, see what it says. But of course, I don't know how far we can go because we have an active railroad track here. And, well, we'll take a walk. The sign. There's the sign. It says, danger, spillway, stay alive, stay back. I think by this time it's a little too late. I think you're over the edge already. Walk. A long, skinny walkway going across this area, but they took it down. One of the problems with these dams, as in all dams, is that we used to have salmon that used to migrate upriver and spawn. Salmon are anadromous fish. They swim upriver to spawn and lay their eggs. But now, even if salmon were reintroduced into these waters, if they tried to come back upriver, they could not negotiate this dam. So someone's going to have to build a salmon ladder, which means like a step ladder, a set of stairs to the side, so the salmon can move to the side and go all the way upstream. So that's the problem with all these dams. And of course, we all feel that if the dams aren't functional anymore, and sometimes they create more problems than they save because they impound water and create greater floods in times, is that we should simply dam the dam. I mean, blast open the dam and let the streams return to their natural flow so that the anadromous fish of shad and alewives and salmon can go back up. Since I'm here, I may as well take this little walk along the railroad tracks just north of this dam, and just to point out something very unusual. Well, again, it's certainly cold air coming out of this tunnel, and a little bit of a breeze. I hope it's not the breeze of an oncoming train. I think I see the light at the end of the tunnel. So let's go to the end, see what happens. A little spooky in here.
This is the oldest railroad tunnel in the country. built in 1835 that carried paying passengers.
Well, I'm at the other end of the tunnel, and I noticed there has been a little bit of shoring up with some concrete, because I can see right in front of me some stalactites and stalagmites and flowstone, which is a result of the calcium carbonate leaching out of the cement and forming these beautiful patterns that you would see in caves. I actually see some stalactites hanging down from the top, T for top for stalactites. And if you go straight down from there, you'll notice that there are some little bumbles right there that are pointing up, little mounds. And those would be, yeah, right there, those would be the stalagmites. Some of these patterns, though, are actually very spooky. So the sooner I'm out of here, the better. Here it is. Waukegan Rock. An Indian by the name of Waukegan was first discovered living under here by the first settlers. You can tell the rock has been split, one of the famous split rocks.
This is the country's largest glacial erratic, 7,000 tons and 176,000 cubic feet, located in Montville, just to the west side of the Thames River.
This next information comes from a publication I made for the local science center in New London. It is called The Geologic History of the Thames River Basin by Stan Gaby. The only copy that I know existing right now is at the Stonington Library in Stonington Borough. Well, this is it. This is called Mammocoke Island. It's where we want to go. We're going to walk out to it. It is connected to the mainland by that little patch of salt marsh that you can see right in front of us. It just so happens to be high tide right now, and probably during a spring tide that would be covered with water, so you can see why it would be called an island. I wouldn't want to traipse out there right now because I'm sure that the salt marsh is very boggy and it's kind of wet underfoot. Now we are here in basically New London or Quaker Hill, and this is the north-south railroad track that goes up to Vermont. And Mammocoke Island itself runs north and south. The glacier came from the north, which was to the left. It did glide up over the bedrock mountain, which we cannot see the bedrock right now through the trees, but fortunately the leaves are not on the trees yet. And then when it continued south, it managed to seep into the crevices of the granite, pluck them off and push them south. So basically the south side of the island is a cliff, which we can see when we go out there. Across the river is the submarine base. It's on perfectly flat land. It's on land that we call a Came Terrace, and that's the reason for the subbase, or the U.S. Naval Reservation, settling there to begin with 100 years ago. Instead of in New London, it settled on the Groton side of the Thames River. And when the ice no longer has pressure at the bottom of it, the water that gets in between the cracks expands, and it plucks off the south side of the hill and pushes the plucked material south. That's why we see in any glaciated landscape like Connecticut, 90% of the cliffs are on the south sides of the hills. And then finally we have a picture of Mammocoke Island, which has glacial till on the north side. That's called the Stowe side, and there's exposed bedrock. There is some aeolian mantle, which means that there is some fine dust that occurred about 10,000 years ago throughout the region and settled over the land, which is our hardpan today. And on the lee side, which is the south side, There are glacial striations that are very evident, sheer cliff walls. That's what we expect to see today. The whole thing is a classic roche montagne. This is the area of the Uncasville Quadrangle. What is important to note about this area, which includes all of the submarine base in the Thames River, is where the yellow deposits are. Those are called cane terraces, and we'll see in a second how they deposited. Well, looks like a nice day for a hike out there. It's low tide right now, so I bet we'd be able to pretty much get across that salt marsh. Let's go take a walk. Well, we made it out onto the salt marsh. Good thing it's low tide. And notice that there's a flat land ahead of us. That's Harrison's Landing, one of the cane terraces. The grass that we're seeing is called Spartina patens. It's a short salt marsh grass. It will come back shortly. At the very edge of the marsh, where the wetter area is, that would be a little taller grass called Spartina alterniflora. Wherever these wet areas are, those are called pans, and they stay wet and they breed mosquitoes. So we have our mosquito problem to blame on these wetted areas. In the past, they used to dig big trenches in the salt marshes and drain them out to the ocean to dry up those pans, but it turns out that their technique of digging the trenches made more pans than they had to begin with. But the state now has a new trench blaster that throws material way out into the air. We don't know if it's a good idea or not. We don't know if the ecology of the marsh has changed much. But what these marshes do, of course, is they're vital, because as the tide comes in and the silt comes in, the silt settles on top of the marsh grows a little bit every single year and keeps pace with the rising tide. And all of the little sea creatures of the eggs and the fishes come in, and they're nourished off of the marsh, and so are the birds. So it's a wonderful ecosystem. The marsh does suck up the extra water, vital to our existence, salt marshes. To date in Connecticut, over half of the salt marshes have been destroyed by being filled in or development that is no longer allowed. We cannot touch the marshes anymore, thankfully. This is our start, Mammacoke Island. We trekked 400 steps north along the railroad tracks, and we saw the Mammacoke Island sitting out in the water, a pristine rock mountain sitting in the Thames River. This is it. All of our understanding will start here. We will discern its glacial origins while paying silent homage to those indigenous people 1,500 years ago who survived almost unbelievable hardships, creating their own race. To see this land, to live with it, to feel it with all your senses is an adventure every American should experience. Know that the path to enlightenment is unknown. It's something that is unpredictable and can occur at unsuspecting places or moments. Finding the breakthrough and seeing has the power to alter the quality of your life. Welcome. Just watching the gentle drainage is awe-inspiring. Pristine island. Nothing built on it now. Yet we're in the middle of a pretty populated area. Again, this is owned and managed, stewarded by the Connecticut College Arboretum. You can still come out here though and enjoy it. If we step back a little, and look at the cliffs. And again, 90% of all of the cliffs in Connecticut, because the ice moved from north to south, 90% of the cliffs are on the south sides of hills. And that's the classic example of what we have here. We can go a little closer. What a tranquil sight. This program, Today's Thames River Treasures, a journey to extraordinary sights along the Thames River. It's a program into managing or appreciating the act of exploring the wonderments in your own backyard. The sites that are going to follow give you access to making a difference in your being. In other words, of participating in journeys of incredible value, whether physically or vicariously. What a sight, and the gift of water dripping off the rocks, creating ferns, lichen, a habitat. Over 1,000 years ago, if I were exploring the woods, I would pick this site especially. In terms of predictive archaeology, this would be the best site to make a settlement, because it is a southern exposure, warmed by the sun, protected from the north winds, right next to the water. Next to the water where you could clam, shellfish, fish, and of course there are going to be deer and other rodents and birds in these woods. Plenty to forage upon. Some may even want to stay here year-round. There's a little beach here, mostly gravel. We see a healthy population of swans, and taking off are two black-back seagulls. But the swans are called mute swans. Not that they're mute, they make a lot of noise. And they were introduced into Central Park in the Hamptons about 1909, 1911 to decorate ponds in rich people's backyards. They're brought over from Europe, so they're not native to this area. They stay here year-round. They have multiplied to such a point now there's over 3,000 of them in Connecticut. And in some cases they're a nuisance, but not as much as a nuisance as the Canada geese that lay their droppings over all of the kids' softball fields and playing fields. The swans they can't be hunted because I guess they're too beautiful with the white feathers. Can you see blasting them out of the water with a shotgun and red spilled? It's not going to work. The only way the DEP suggests you keep down the population of swans is to, when you come across their eggs, shake them, addle the eggs. The swans will sit on them thinking they're still incubating the eggs, and they will not produce. Otherwise, if you break the eggs, the swans will lay more eggs. I have seen just one swan go up against two of my dogs, a large Malamute and a large Akita, and the swan chased them backwards such that they fell over backwards. Some swans have been so territorial they've been known to knock over canoes, and you don't want to leave a little toddler along the beach when these things are trying to protect their young. We come down to another place. The black stain on the rocks is really a black algae called a black zone, or Colothrix. It's a blue-green algae. The red stain is also an algae. We're at low tide now. Just to the west of me, inside that thicket, it's totally grown over. But that was a archaeological study for about 20 or 30 years. The Connecticut College archaeologist, Dr. Harold Julie, led some students in here, and they did some digs in some of the fertile soil, and they found that piles and piles of shells and other human inhabitation. And it's called an Indian midden, M-I-D-D-E-N. It is basically a place of shell refuse, shell heaps. There are Indian middens dating back 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago up and down the Thames River. And this is not one of the most extensive ones, but we did have a burial, found a burial on the island. Some kids did anyway, of some 2 of the native Indians that were here. What I want to mention about what we're looking at right inside the woods is so much briar there now. I do not want to go into it, but what I wanted to do, what I used to do in the past was just grab a handful of that soil and show people how black and humous and sweet smelling it was. And why it was so sweet smelling was because it was just totally composed of shells. The Indians used to shuck shells here for their meats, and they did that late summer and fall, and that made the soil very fertile. The predominant type of shell here, or 95% of it, was Crasseria virginica. A couple other shells were here, and a couple bones of some other animals. Across the river from here, over where the subbase is, there was another, maybe the same group of Indians earlier on in the spring that put weirs out in the water to catch the fish that were running upstream to spawn. But that only happened in the spring. So you see there was lots of food taking from around here from both the spring all the way until late fall. And you can see how shallow this is, that it would be a good place for shell fishing. More information about this site can come from the Connecticut College Arboretum. Some of these pooled areas are called tidal ponds. And if you look at them close, you can actually see they're green and fuzzy. And what's green and fuzzy is that they are covered with little bubbles, and bubbles are coming up to the surface. Well, of course, what's happening is that there's a sun and there's algae, and the algae in here, their own ecosystem, are producing oxygen, the way algae produces oxygen. This is a very smoothed off piece of the Namaquoc Island. I'd like to show you a few other things. If you do go to Conn College, the Arboretum office, the book that you want to pick up is called Archaeology in the Connecticut College Arboretum, bulletin number 33. And it will tell you about the studies that are here. And it will even show you that close by, when they were making a bulldozing, excavating for a soccer field right close by, they did come across an intact skeletal remains of one of the indigenous people. Now, archaeological sites are disappearing quick because of both development and sea level rise. We dated the development of this midden to about 1,500 years ago. Some say to 4,000 years ago. If that were the case, 1,500 years ago, sea level would have been about 50 feet lower than it is today. So it would not be right there. Personally, being a geologist, what's happening here is not sea level rising so much as the northeast is sinking. We are sinking at a very fast rate. Geologists have known this for a long time, and they call that periglacial downwarping, whatever that means. It's kind of like a subduction zone or a geosyncline. Why it's not pushing North America very easily towards the west like it used to is because there is a big resistance out in the west. It is called the Rocky Mountains. in the Rocky Mountains are underlain by a gigantic volcanic ridge underneath the continent that does not want to move. So we're kind of being squeezed here. The compression is this way. Again, the coastal sites are disappearing quick because of the sea level rise and coastal development. To show you the scars that the ice cap made as it was scraping from north to south. And here they are. You see these grooves? It's not a bulldozer that was here. It is a groove that goes from north to south. There are a couple of them. Here's another one. Every place we look, we will find them. These are called glacial striations. And if we look to where they are pointing, we can see they are pointing just to the east of south. So that tells us the direction that the ice moved in as it was coming down from the north. It was coming down from just to the west of north as it came. Across the river is the USS Nautilus, the first atomic nuclear powered submarine, and its calling numbers are 571. There is a submarine force museum right there. It is free to get into and to go through the Nautilus, so please feel free to go down to where the subbase is, where that American flag is, park there and visit the Nautilus. Now I'll sweep quickly because that is the submarine base, and I'm sure they don't want many pictures of the submarine base, although I don't see any subs in here yet. About that 571, there was a movie out not long ago called U-571 with Matthew McConaughey, and it was supposed to have been where he was in an American sub and they captured a German sub and also captured the Enigma machine from the German sub, which during World War II was that special machine that the Germans used for code that we couldn't break for the longest time, but eventually a Brit decoded it. A little bit closer. And they're looking at me. I hope they're not going to make an assault run. I do want to point south. We're looking at the Gold Star Bridge that connects on the right New London to Groton on the left. And there are two bridges there now. One was started in early 70s, I guess, and there's a railroad bridge right behind it that we can see. So we're looking south out towards the Sound, which is the way most of the Thames River flows. But remember, the Thames River is tidal. When there's a high tide out in the ocean, there's a high tide comes up here a little bit later. Why we want to mention the bridge is because before there was any bridge from New London to Groton, folks that wanted to travel from New York City up to Boston or to Providence took a train up to New London and then took a train up along the Worcester Railroad up to Worcester and then a train to Providence or Boston. They actually had to go through Norwich in order to get to Boston from New York or to get to Providence from New York. Now, the first bridge across the Thames was in 1889, and that was a railroad bridge, kind of a rickety one, but that was the first time then that anybody that wanted to make that route from New York to Boston could go straight across the river, through Groton, through Stonington, and on the way to Providence and Boston. So they no longer had to go through Norwich. Guess what? That was the end of Norwich's commerce, because nobody had to go through Norwich anymore. I'll give you an example of how that works. It's a little different view of the Gold Star Bridge. They were not built at the same time. To increase traffic, they had to build a parallel one right next to it. I think they started one of the bridges in the early 70s. The train bridge is just to the south of that, now known as the and it's spinning cantilevers to let very large ships go by. Come here on any day and you can see where the races start for the Harvard-Yale regattas. The sculls either start here or end here and then go upriver. Now, I may have mentioned it before, but if we took a peek over at the submarine base again, you'll notice it's very flat. It's a came terrace. It was formed at the end of the last ice age. And how these things form is, when the ice was melting, there was a big tongue of ice in the Thames right in front of us, a tongue of ice. So the meltwater that came from behind me was going towards the south. It had to slosh between this big tongue of ice cube, and the sides, the bedrock sides, and it was depositing flat sands and gravels. And as you can see right over there at Harrison's Landing, that's flat sand and gravel deposit. That's called a came terrace. So these things formed at the waning of the ice sheet. The came terrace where the subbase is formed at the same time. A little bit of history about the subbase is that at the turn of the last century, the United States Navy wanted to make a station in New London, but they couldn't find a suitable place, and the only place they found was this large came terrace on the Groton side. So as a result, that's why 110 or so years ago, the U.S. Naval Reservation settled on the Groton side, and that's why the Navy subbase is there now. So a lot of the history of the area is dictated by the geomorphology, the geological history of the area. And I find that pretty exciting. Now, there's one other point that I wanted to make. It's not a very happy point, but if we could look up past the up north, past the submarine base, we would come to Dow Chemical Company. And just a quick thing, I don't want to be so negative, but the Dow Chemical Company in 1999 was a blazing inferno. It was the worst horrific tragedy that we had ever witnessed in Connecticut or any place in the southeastern New England. What happened was 1 million cubic yards of their polystyrene foam caught fire, and the blaze was so high and so hot. This is 1999. It went so high in the air that the prevailing wind was going towards the south, and finally it cooled off and fell down upon the folks in the quiet village of Montauk on the south shore of Long Island. And what was falling down upon them were dioxins and other carcinogenic polycyclic aromatics. Because when you burn that styrene, you get at least 1,000 different carcinogens that are very harmful to your health. I wonder if the folks at Montauk have developed anything from 1999, or at least if they see this show someplace, they might put two and two together. The people on Long Island thought that millstone exploded, so the calls were all over the place. And it was a horrific thing. What caused it, we're not sure. They put their polystyrene so close to the railroad tracks that some fishermen walking by simply could have dropped a cigarette butt, and the cigarette butt, caught on all the dry leaves that was there, and then started that thing ablaze. And believe me, it wasn't just carbon dioxide that was ablaze. They could not put out the fire. The whole thing had to burn completely to the ground. Ever since that time, well, now they still have more than 1 million cubic feet of that blue polystyrene, and but now they moved it 30 feet away from the railroad tracks. I hope the safety personnel there know enough that if someone's going by in a boat and happens to have a flare gun, that they take that into consideration, that try to keep the neighborhood safe. It's a good thing the blaze was high enough so that it didn't come right down upon the Groton residents or the New London residents. So it shows you the variables of the wind and the vagaries of the wind systems. It also shows you how susceptible some of these places are. Like, who was watching the store? No one foresaw that would happen. Incredible. Lack of safety foresight, I guess. And of course, before that time, about 20 years ago, the New London Day would publish where all the dangerous places were around the area. That could explode or have fire or be nuclear radiation or something like that. But of course, they stopped doing that real quick for fear that now all of a sudden the terrorists would know what places to hit. So back to the happier days, and now we're looking at the beautiful glistening light off of the Thames River. We'll continue our journey. Something more about these granite-like rocks. You notice how smoothly polished this surface is? Well, most likely this particular surface was not exposed for 12,000 years. Instead, it was covered with that Aeolian loess and some more vegetation on top of that, and in time it was exposed now over a couple thousand years. But when the granite is exposed to the air, or granite-like rock, I'll look at the granite right next to us, if I can get very close, and you will see that the rock seems to be breaking up into little grains, into little pebbles. Well, that's what happens. You know, the granite itself, the quartz is very strong, so the darker material around the quartz will dissolve away, and these little quartz pebbles will be grains that simply go downstream and eventually go out to the ocean and make all the sand that we see along the beaches. So the origin of sand comes from the granite mountains that are eroding into these little pebbly forms, and the pebbles go downstream. The larger pebbles with rushing water, and the smaller fine grains travel further with gentler water, but they all go out towards the end of the opening, and usually they try to settle out there and make a delta so that ships cannot pass. So frequently the mouth of the Thames River has to be dredged even to make room for these deep draft submarines, particularly the Class 688 ones. So there had been a couple big dredging projects, but when you start dredging big scoops out of the middle of the river, where do you put that stuff? Well, that's always been a problem. You should really take it far out to sea and drop it, but that's too expensive. So if they drop it close into shore, you know, that's another problem. They made a mound one time just off of Ocean Beach, about a mile off of Ocean Beach. The mound was so high of the dredge spoils back in the late 70s, early 80s, that one of the submarines that came in actually scraped bottom on it. High, that you don't want your subs to scrape on anything. It's still a very colorful history of what's going on here. And even these rocks, you can tell, are breaking up. I mean, just eventually the shaking of the earth, a little bit of shaking is going to push this further and further towards the water, and some of these rocks will eventually tumble right down into the water like we've seen turbulence, and the little waves of the water will pull them down. We're still on Memicook Island on the south side, but we're all the way here on the southeastern edge, and I do want to tell you that the water drops off precipitously here. It's very deep right here on this side. If you were to take a boat or a sailboat, it's pretty good. And actually the swimming's pretty good here too. So if in the middle of the summer you had enough guts to come out here with some long pants on to brave the briars, or if you pulled up with a boat, boy, the swimming off here is fantastic. And of course the water is cleaner these days than it was back before 1972, before the Clean Water Act. So we all rejoice with that all of our waterways and the oceans are cleaner, because we are no longer allowed to dump stuff straight into the ocean. So even though we may celebrate that thought that we have clean water, the next question should be, if they couldn't dump it into the ocean or the rivers anymore, what did they do with it? That's a big mystery. Well, most likely what they did with it was simply bring it to a landfill and dump it into the soil. And so now all those toxins and carcinogens that used to go into the ocean have gone into our drinking water supply, into our aquifers. So the biggest threat that we face in our lifetime and in many generations is that our drinking water from the ground will be so poisoned that we will continually have to buy bottled water, or we will have to drill down 800 feet like some of them do in Stonington to get some of that water from the deep granite down below. But that's very expensive. So where there's rejoice, there's also sorrow after that. So remember, we always have to weigh things, the balance, what we do with it. I did mention, maybe I didn't mention in this case, that straight ahead where this camera is pointing now, there's like a church steeple that you can see. Well, that is the Coast Guard Academy. We're very happy to have the Coast Guard Academy here. And go to the football games, they're free, the basketball games, track meets. The Harvard-Yale Regatta sometimes starts from the Gold Star Bridge down there and goes up to where Dow Chemical is, or sometimes it starts at Dow Chemical and goes down to where the Gold Star Bridge is. But I'm afraid Harvard has been the winner for, it seems like, the longest time between the rowing crews. Rivalry between Harvard and Yale. Sad to say that. But we have both of their boathouses here on the Thames River to hold their boats. So come and enjoy that. Should be coming up pretty soon. This is Union Station, New London, Connecticut, built in 1885, and it was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, very famous architect. Believe it or not, the city of New London, when they tore through the Fort Trumbull area for eminent domain, they even wanted to rip this thing down, and even the sympathies of a New London Day wanted to rip it down. So much for progress. But fortunately, because everyone got behind it, the Department of Interior, etc., it is saved. It is the most magnificent structure in architecture. Notice that just to the right is the Fisher's Island Ferry office. Fisher's Island Ferry is right to the right of that. And if we pan around here, we will see more of New London. Very pretty town. And that's a Civil War monument that we just looked at. We're looking at the whale motif in New London. It's called the Whaling City, but of course we know it should be called the Sealing City. We went after seals 90% of the time, not whales. Let's walk to the back of the Union Station and see where the new Coast Guard Museum is supposed to be located. Mystic Whaler. Sometimes cruises the Hudson River, sometimes Block Island, sometimes way past that, Newport. There's the train station, and there's the Thames Landing offices. That should be the future home of the Coast Guard Museum, as well as occupying that whole building. It should be a tear-down building to the left. The Thames Landing offices is almost turnkey. If you add, as long as they keep the same architecture as what's here in town. And then that way they wouldn't have to build a $20 million walkway. And this road here, South Water Street, can be one way out going north. Bank Street can be two ways going both ways. It would look beautiful. Everybody would see it coming in, and it wouldn't be this big glass monstrosity that they are planning right now. That is only the opinion of Stan Gaby, though. It would save them so much money. It'd be unbelievable. You're right near the ferries. There's the ferry stations. Beautiful picture of the New London Ledge Light, which is now stewarded by the U.S. Customs House, which I am in right now, and next to it is the U.S. Coast Guard Bark Eagle. And I thank Bill very much for letting me in and let me check the place out. And of course, they do run tours through this Customs House. Built in when? This Customs House?
1833.
1833. Oh my God! And it has a connection with the Amistad, of course.
A very big connection. Big story. We have our biggest exhibit.
So can you introduce yourself from there to there?
Sarah Ritchie.
Rank?
Third class.
Fourth class, Alyssa Payne.
And fourth class, Gabe Zogby.
Who did this one?
Well, look, I don't know who did it, but we've got a bunch of them in there.
You do?
We have a race rock exhibit.
Oh, okay.
And so that's a good one. That's an excellent one, but we have some other excellent ones too.
This is a model of New London Ledge Light, built in 1905, and by Bob Landry again. But while we're in here, we're going to look at the Fresnel lens that was in the New London Ledge Light, and here it is. This one was built in Paris, France, in 1890. A Fresnel lens. And it is floating in a pool of 800 pounds of mercury. and it floats frictionless that way. So it had to come out at some time, and now the light is no longer hand cranked up by the Coast Guard, but instead it is automated. But this is a beautiful example here at the U.S. Customs House right here in downtown New London on Bank Street. All right, there's another model by Landry, and this is the Pequot light, it's called, and it is the fourth oldest light in the country. It was built in 1760.
Fort Trumbull, named in honor of Connecticut's Governor Jonathan Trumbull. The original fort was built in 1777, as well as the Fort Griswold across the river on the Thames side. The stone blockhouse is still there today, built at that time. This particular fort was built in 1849 and represents a novel design in fortification architecture. In 1915, it became the newly established Coast Guard Academy. From 1939 to 1946, 15,000 persons graduated from the site as merchant marine officers. After World War II, it housed the Navy's Underwater Sound Laboratory, now called the Navy Underwater Systems Center, which is now in Newport. So now this is our state of Connecticut resource, a state park.
A little more of a commanding view of the fort in the Thames River. It was built to defend New London from naval assault. And I'm sure it worked because no Navy ever assaulted us. And we might be able to see Latimer Reef Light from this vantage point. I can see this lighthouse that's on the Avery Point campus, built in 1941. I believe it was never lit though, because we just got into the war, and so the Navy took over control of all the lighthouses to make sure that we wouldn't have, you know, beacons of light for the enemy to bomb us. To the left of that is the Branford Mansion, built in 1905 by Morton Plant, a railroad magnate, and that was about the time of all the heyday of building mansions that were on Newport. It houses the administrative offices of the University of Connecticut here, which does offer a BGS program, which is a Bachelor of General Studies. I have a feeling the roar of the wind is going to overtake my voice, so I'm not sure if I have to dub this later. Here's a library right in front of us that the public is free to use. There are some of the classrooms, that a little antiquated classrooms, but still the University of Connecticut is a public, open university. Beyond that statue is the Race Rock Lighthouse. And just to the east of it is Fisher's Island. The Race Rock Lighthouse sits on the very edge of a deep canyon that goes 350 feet down, where water pours back and forth into Long Island Sound 4 times a day, 25 billion gallons per hour rather, I'm sorry. Each time it goes through. So we're at the place called the Horse Race, the vicious tidal waters for any mariner. Some time ago I built a whole model of Long Island Sound out of fiberglass. Now that's Long Island that you can see in the middle. It looks like a skeleton, and Connecticut is up on the top. And I made it so that you can fill it with milk and have the milk slosh back and forth right through this area right over here, which is the race, this area. That's where water sloshes back and forth. 25 billion gallons each time it goes through. That's 4 times per day. So most of the activity for Long Island Sound is right here on the eastern edge. It's very clear, very flush water, and it is very clean and very deep, 350 feet deep, carved by that sloshing back and forth, a very deep channel. Whereas the western edge of the Sound is kind of stagnant down by New York City, and that's where they have all the problems in the summertime with the surface water heating up and fish kills and thermoclines and all that kind of stuff. So we're very fortunate to be here on the dynamic part of the Sound, eastern edge, which is a perfect place to teach oceanography. This is a sketch of Race Rock Lighthouse. which is available to you if you just look through this particular book called The Orient Point Passage by Gaby, produced in 1984. Should be available at any of your libraries. Here's a group that made it out to the island with me, and in the background you can see Race Rock Lighthouse. Now, an interesting side to this is that we were at the Customs House. One time in the past, I rented a school bus, put it on the ferry, and took about 30 or so folks from the Customs House, the whole Board of Trustees and the President and so on, took them out for a tour around Fisher's Island, and we had a gay old time. And that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Kind of hard to duplicate that though, but we had fun. Thank you folks for coming. There is one reference that all the libraries should have. It is called Day Trips to Connecticut, 1979 by Gaby. Several of the illustrations in the back show exactly where the boulder moraines are and where the ice made in advance, and where the distribution of drumlins are and what the bedrock is all about. Yeah, it'd be awful nice to have that 8-foot-long hammerhead hanging up in this Mystic YMCA pool, because their swimming team is called the Mystic YMCA Hammerheads. This is where it belongs. Okay, way up there on the second floor where nobody can see it is the hammerhead shark that used to belong to me, and it was in the late 80s when it left Mohegan Community College, and I did lend it to the local science center. Well, Paul Tater was the director at that time, and another executive director from Pfizer was there for a while, but abandoned the building and the project, and the science center closed up in New London. And what happened was, it was free for all, everybody took everything in the local high schools. Project Oceanology grabbed my hammerhead, and I'm sure, I've been asking them for years, can they please donate it to or lend it to the Mystic YMCA, because their swimming team is called the Hammerheads. We're here at Project Oceanology, and one of their fantastic displays here is of a great white shark that was caught in 1983 off of Block Island by two fishermen. It took them about 5 hours to land it. This is the largest fish that has been ever caught off New England. It is 15 feet long, weighs almost 3,000 pounds. And the great whites, of course, are voracious. And here we have a replication of them, and it's right here in the cafeteria of Project Oceanology. The great white shark, the biggest fish ever caught off of these waters in New England. There's one of our participants at UConn holding a dogfish shark. There's plenty of these things around here. They call them trash fish, but they're really nice eating. And Arthur Treacher's used to include in its fish the dogfish shark. That's how tasty it is. A map of New England shows that all of that pink shaded area is the watershed where water drains directly into Long Island Sound. Most of the watershed is from the Connecticut River, but the story about that 410-mile long Connecticut River is for another program. But we know where all of the fresh water comes into Long Island Sound from, and that's basically all that pink area. This is Dr. Mickey Weiss, the founder of Project Oceanology. Long Island Sound is an incredibly important natural resource for our state, both from an environmental perspective and its economic driver. What we find in the Sound is a treasure. We follow the Thames River all the way out to here. Project Oceanology actually runs seal watches in the wintertime. There's an abundance of seals that hang around here for the winter. There are bird migrations galore. There are alien invaders that do come in and take over and displace some of the species we have. We have 200 kinds of seaweeds. We also have a lot of very interesting beasts, including 29 species of sponges, 133 mollusks, 327 crustaceans, and 174 fish species. We actually have kelp forests in Long Island Sound, said Peter Oster, a research professor down here. So this place is a haven for the study of marine biology and all of these creatures. We have also, well, this is in Groton, but close by we have, the Mystic Aquarium. So please come down and visit Project Oceanology. They will allow you in here and be part of appreciating the treasures that we have and some of the kind of little squeamish fishes that swim around. We are at the mouth of the Thames River, and we saw the New London Ledge Light. New London Harbor Light is in front of us. And this structure here is Eastern Point Beach. It is open to the public. There is recreational swimming here and plenty of parking. True sunset over this vast and wet space changes the color of the day in my face. True sunset over the land and the sea changes my vision and brings warmth to me. True sunset's over. It's dropped. No appeal. The night is darkness and not how I feel. Amy Gaby. Amy Gaby. Stan Gaby. A poem by Robert Frost. Neither out too far nor in deep. The people along the sand all turn and look one way. They turn their back on the land. They look at the sea all day. As long as it takes to pass, a ship keeps raising its hull. The wetter ground like glass reflects a standing gull. The land may vary more, but wherever the truth may be, the water comes ashore and the people look at the sea. They cannot look out far, they cannot look in deep, but when was that ever a bar to any watch they keep? Awareness alone will suffice as testimony to the presence of a creative spirit of our scenic landscape. It is uniquely our own sanctuary. Nowhere in southeastern New England is the true regency of the land-sea connection more impressive and inspiring, where we can be at peace with ourselves and where we can face up to God and be unafraid. We just have to say it again. Wow, this is a great place. We are at the end of the Thames River, and we say goodbye to our little journey. We did kind of start from the beginning of the Thames River with the two freshwater tributaries that we took a look at, stopped at points in between, and all of these are treasures that no one can forget, and now's the time to take those trips.